Good evening, my dear friends. Look at me for a moment. What do you see? A man standing before you, flesh and blood, breath and bone, speaking words that travel through the air and arrive in your ears as sound. Your senses confirm all of this. They report it as solid, as present, as real. And tonight, I am going to prove to you that these 5 faithful servants, these loyal reporters, you have trusted every waking moment of your life, are the greatest deceivers you have ever encountered. And more than that, I am going to teach you how to fool them back. Now, before you conclude that I have taken leave of my senses, which is perhaps the appropriate condition for this conversation, let me ask you something. How many of you here tonight have been in love? Look around the room. Nearly every hand is raised. Tell me then, can you touch love? Can you weigh it? Can you put it under a microscope and identify it by its chemical composition? Can you point to it in the physical world and say, there is the love in that precise location? No, you cannot. And yet falling in love may be the most real experience you have ever had. It did not stay politely in the realm of the invisible. It reorganized everything. How you thought, how you slept, how food tasted, how time moved, how the world looked when you woke up in the morning. Something that your 5 senses could not locate, could not measure, could not detect in any physical way, transformed your entire reality. This is your first lesson tonight, and it is the foundation of everything that follows. The most powerful forces in your life are completely invisible to your senses. Your senses are extraordinary instruments for certain tasks. They can tell you the temperature of a room, the texture of a surface, the distance between 2 objects. They are superb historians of the physical world, but they cannot tell you what is possible. They cannot perceive potential. They cannot see into the infinite field of consciousness from which all visible things first arise. And if you allow them to be the final judges of what is real, if you say, I will only believe what I can see, only trust what I can touch, you have handed the keys of your entire life to instruments that are constitutionally incapable of showing you what your life could become. Right now in this room, you are surrounded by radio waves, television signals, wireless communications of every description. They are passing through your body at this moment. Through the walls, through the air, through everything around you. Your 5 senses detect none of them. To your physical perception, they simply do not exist. Turn on a radio, and music arrives from 300 miles away. Turn on a television, and moving pictures appear that were transmitted through the very air you have been breathing this whole time. What changed? Not the waves, they were always there. Not the signals, they were always broadcasting. What changed was the instrument through which you were perceiving. You tuned into a frequency that was present all along but invisible until the right receiver was switched on. Your consciousness is that receiver. Your imagination is the dial. And the unseen world of infinite possibility, the field in which every version of your desired life already exists, is the broadcast that has been transmitting continuously, waiting for you to stop looking for it with instruments that cannot find it and start listening with the one that can. But the difficulty is this: most people have allowed their physical senses to become not servants but sovereigns. They look at their bank account and say, I am poor, and this number is the truth about me. They look at their circumstances and say, this is my reality, and I must adapt to it. They look at their body and say, this condition is who I am. They have become prisoners of their own perception, caged not by the world itself, but by the narrow bandwidth of the instruments they have agreed to trust. A woman came to me some years ago. She sat across from me with tears moving down her face and described her circumstances with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been fighting too long. Mr. Goddard, she said, I want to believe what you teach, but I cannot ignore what I see. My husband is gone. My savings are gone. My home is nearly gone. How can I believe in anything but this? I said to her, my dear, you speak of what you see as if it were permanent. and what you can imagine as if it were fantasy. But I tell you, you have it precisely backward. What you see is temporary. It is yesterday's imaginal acts crystallized into physical form, and like all crystals, it can be dissolved and reformed. What you can imagine is the more fundamental reality. It is tomorrow's world, seeking to be born. Your senses, you see, are historians. They can only report what has already happened, what has already been created, what has already solidified into the physical world. They are looking at a photograph of the past and calling it the present. But imagination is a prophet. It perceives what wants to emerge, what is real in consciousness before it is real in matter, what exists in the invisible before it has been given permission to become visible. The question is not which reality is true. Both are true. The question is which reality is primary, which creates which. And the answer, once you truly see it, is as clear as anything can be. The invisible creates the visible. Consciousness creates manifestation. The imagined precedes the physical, always, without exception, in the same way that the blueprint precedes the building not as a nice metaphor, but as the actual order of creation. Let me tell you about a young man who attended my lectures in Los Angeles. He was a musician, genuinely gifted, as I could hear in how he spoke about music. But his senses provided him with daily evidence of his limitations. The apartment was small. The bank account was nearly empty. The bookings were few. Every morning he woke into the same circumstances, and every evening he returned to them. His senses, diligent historians that they are, dutifully reported all of this. But this young man had understood something crucial. He understood that his current circumstances were not his destiny. They were his past imaginal acts made manifest, and that meant they were the product of his previous inner state, not the definition of his permanent reality. If the inner state could be changed genuinely, the outer world must eventually follow. It has no other option. It is law. Every night, this young man would lie in his modest apartment and do something that would have seemed, to anyone watching, entirely absurd. He would conduct an imaginary orchestra in a great concert hall. And he did not do this vaguely, in the way of daydreams. He did it with full sensory commitment. He felt the specific weight of the baton in his hand. He heard the sound of several hundred musicians responding to his gesture. He smelled the particular air of a grand hall, that mixture of wood and velvet and flowers and human warmth. He felt the specific satisfaction that lives in the chest of a man doing exactly what he was born to do. He heard the applause not as a background sound, but as a specific, detailed, overwhelming physical reality. To his senses, he was lying alone in a shabby apartment on a Tuesday night. To his imagination, which he had trained through nightly repetition to be more vivid and more emotionally present than his physical circumstances, he was a celebrated conductor. Which reality was more real to him? The imaginal one. He had made it so detailed, so sensory, so emotionally compelling, that his five senses began to doubt their own testimony. Within 2 years, through a series of connections that appeared, to those observing from outside, to be unlikely coincidences, he became assistant conductor of a major symphony orchestra. Within 5 years, he was conducting on stages across the world. His senses had been forced to conform to what his imagination had already made real. This is not fantasy. This is not the wishful thinking of someone who has not examined the mechanism carefully. This is the science of consciousness in operation, the same mechanism by which every human achievement has ever come to pass, understood and applied deliberately rather than accidentally. But I must warn you about what happens when you first begin this practice. Your senses will push back. They are not accustomed to being overruled, and they will present their evidence with considerable force. Look, they will say, nothing has changed. The same apartment, the same job, the same bank account, the same face in the mirror. You are being ridiculous. Stop this. This resistance is the test. It is precisely where most people abandon the practice, at the very moment when it is beginning to work. You must remember what your senses cannot tell you. They can only perceive what has already been created. They cannot perceive what is in the process of being created. A new reality is being assembled in the invisible, in consciousness, in the imaginal realm where creation actually occurs. Your senses, looking at the physical world, see only the old photograph. They cannot see the new painting being made on the canvas behind them. Let me tell you something from my own life. I grew up in Barbados. As a young man, I had a burning desire, specific, urgent, consuming, to go to New York and study mysticism. My senses provided overwhelming evidence that this was impossible. No money for passage, no connections in America, no formal education that would open relevant doors. Every morning I woke in Barbados sensory fact. Every evening I returned to sleep in Barbados sensory fact. Day after day my senses delivered the same report. This is where you are. This is what is true. Accept it. I refuse to let my senses be my masters. Instead, I began a nightly practice that I can only describe as the deliberate construction of an invisible reality more vivid than my visible one. I would lie in my bed and inhabit New York. Not picture it from the outside, inhabit it. I would see the particular quality of light that falls between tall buildings. I would smell the different air of a great city. I would hear the specific sounds of that particular place. I would feel in my body the specific satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, not relief, not triumph, simply the quiet rightness of a man in his place. Night after night, the imaginal New York became more familiar, more textured, more emotionally present than the physical Barbados. Sometimes I would wake up genuinely surprised to find myself still in my bed in Barbados. The invisible had become more real than the visible. My family was concerned. Neville, they would say, stop this dreaming and face facts. They meant well. They did not yet understand what I had discovered. That what you make real in imagination becomes real in manifestation, not as a pleasant theory, but as the actual operating law of consciousness. Within months, opportunities appeared that no one could have predicted or planned. A stranger offered passage to New York. Doors that had not existed swung open. My invisible reality became my visible experience because I had learned to believe the unseen more completely than I believed the seen. Let me now give you something specific, a practice you can begin tonight. As you approach sleep this evening, choose one thing you genuinely desire to experience. And I want you to notice the precision of that word. Experience, not obtain. Not imagining yourself pursuing it, working toward it, hoping to reach it. Imagining yourself already living in it from the inside as the person for whom this is simply the current texture of their life. If you desire work you love, do not imagine yourself interviewing, applying, performing well enough to be chosen. Imagine yourself already settled into that work, the specific feel of the chair, the view from the window, the sound of the environment, the specific quality of satisfaction that lives in the chest of someone doing what they were made to do. If you desire love, do not imagine yourself searching, hoping, presenting yourself hopefully to someone who might choose you. Imagine yourself already beloved, the specific warmth of being completely known by another person, the ease of someone who has nothing to prove, the particular comfort of a love that has been real long enough to be ordinary. And here is the element that separates genuine imaginal work from mere daydreaming: specificity, details. Your senses are convinced by particulars, not by generalities. They believe what is specific, textured, sensory, detailed. So if you want to convince them, if you want the imaginal reality to become more real to you than your current circumstances, you must inhabit it with the full specificity of a person who is actually there. Not I am successful, the weight of the keys, The particular smell of the coffee, the exact quality of light in the room, the sound of a specific conversation, the temperature of the air, not I have money. The feeling of a specific security that does not grip and contract when a bill arrives. The easy confidence in your voice when money is not a source of tension. The particular joy of helping someone without the calculation of whether you can afford to. Speak the language of the senses, and you will convince them. Speak in generalities, and they will remain skeptical. A businessman once asked me the question that sits at the back of many minds. Neville, how do I know whether I am genuinely living in the unseen reality or merely engaging in an elaborate fantasy? I said, the test is naturalness. When you are truly living from the invisible reality, when it has become in consciousness, your genuine home, you will find yourself acting from it without forcing anything. Your behavior will shift in ways you did not plan, because behavior is always the natural expression of the state you actually inhabit. Your voice will change. The way you carry yourself will change. The decisions you make will shift, not because you are performing a new identity, but because you have actually become it in the dimension that matters. When you are merely wishing for something, it feels effortful and artificial. You must constantly remind yourself to feel a certain way. But when you are genuinely living from the invisible reality, it feels more natural than your physical circumstances. That naturalness is your confirmation. A woman I knew, a single mother working 2 jobs, living with the specific grinding anxiety of someone for whom money is a daily emergency, heard this teaching and decided to conduct a genuine experiment. Every night she would live from the consciousness of abundance, not fantasizing about windfalls or dramatic reversals, simply inhabiting the feeling of financial ease in her body, in her chest, in the specific quality of a breath taken by someone who is not afraid. She would imagine shopping without the contraction of checking prices. She would feel the peace of knowing her children's needs were met not as something she was fighting to achieve, but as the simple, unremarkable background of her life. At first, her senses argued loudly. Look at the account. Look at the bills. Look at the apartment. This is reality. Stop pretending. She did not fight them. She simply returned, each evening, to the invisible reality she was making her home. Something began to shift first in her, then in the world around her. She carried herself differently. She spoke with a confidence that had not been there before. She made decisions from a different inner position, not from fear's calculations, but from abundance's ease. Without consciously attempting it, she had begun to act from the state of prosperity rather than from the state of lack. And the world, reading her new frequency, responded accordingly. Within 6 months, an unexpected promotion. Within a year, a small business that grew quickly. Within 2 years, the financial reality she had been inhabiting in consciousness for all that time was simply her visible life. But here is the detail, she told me, that I want you to hold on to. By the time the physical changes arrived, they did not feel miraculous. They felt inevitable. She had been living from that state for so long in consciousness that the physical manifestation felt like the natural completion of something already real. Not magic, not surprise. Simply the outer world catching up to the inner world that had already been established. I must address the objection that always arises here, because it is an honest one and deserves an honest answer. Isn't this self-deception? When I imagine health while feeling sick, am I lying to myself? When I imagine wealth while experiencing lack, am I departing from reality? Let me ask you this. When a scientist peers through a microscope and sees bacteria invisible to the naked eye, is she deceiving herself? When an astronomer uses a telescope to observe a galaxy that no human eye could ever see unaided, is he being delusional? Of course not. They are using instruments calibrated to perceive realities that exist beyond the narrow range of unaided physical sensation. The bacteria is real. The galaxy is real. The limitation was never in the world, it was in the instrument being used to perceive it. Imagination is your consciousness telescope. It is calibrated to perceive realities that exist beyond the narrow spectrum. Your five physical senses can report. To trust only what your five senses can detect while dismissing what your imagination perceives is precisely analogous to insisting that only visible light is real while denying the existence of X-rays, radio waves, infrared radiation, and the entire electromagnetic spectrum that lies beyond the range of the eye. The unseen is not less real than the seen. In the order of creation, it is more real. It is the source, the cause, the originating dimension from which the visible world perpetually arises. Your circumstances are not reality. They are yesterday's imagination crystallized into physical form. Your imagination today is tomorrow's manifestation, waiting to be born. These are not the same thing. They are not equally primary. Consciousness is primary. Manifestation follows. A gentleman came to me once who was in a difficult health situation. His doctors had delivered a verdict